Intertextual Cardboard Experience.
Hello and welcome to Intertextual Cardboard Experience. Fascinating 15th guest in Luis Aguasvivas, writer for Pop Matters and a member of the New York Video Game Critics Circle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation. We had a nice little pre-conversation too about a lot of board game stuff. So we'll see if that pops up when the time comes. But the kind of my introduction to you and your work was through another board game channel and podcast in Liz Davidson's Beyond Solitaire. So I listened to your episode on that one, and just all the things that you're talking about completely just like blew me away. It was just like, wow, okay, like these are some of the things I've thought about, but maybe not in this way. And I don't know, I just loved the episode. And then by the end, you brought up something that had kind of popped up earlier, but that was the video game Tetris, and the way you're talking about it had me thinking about a whole bunch of different things. And ultimately, that's what this episode is going to be about. It's going to be about Tetris from kind of like, four different angles: the video game itself, the movie, tetrominos, Tetris and board games, and then a very nebulous category of Tetris in real life. So before we get to any of that, though, I just kind of want to ask about you, your writing, video game criticism, involvement in board games, when you became interested in both, and then any sort of intersections in those two mediums, and then potentially other ones, because I know you write about like a whole bunch of different things, and I know that's like 5 different questions. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want, and I can maybe ask some follow-up questions too.
Hey, no, yeah. So I've always walked along both paths when it comes to analog and digital games. I mean, I personally don't, for the purpose of when it comes to writing, researching, and criticism, I don't really have a hard line differentiating the two. Obviously, there are differences. It's more, for me, is there's certain things that I tend to obviously cover video games more, just because the barrier to entry when it comes to writing about them tends to be, I mean, there's challenges, like, but overall, like, it can be something I can do by myself, right? Tabletop games are something that typically you need at least another person, and obviously if I'm writing critically about something, it's going to, I'm probably going to be playing the game a lot. I'm going to be looking at it from a bunch of different angles. I don't want to subjugate family members or friends, into that process. But no, I mean, as a kid, I've always played games. I always played, things like dominoes, card games, Parcheesi, as it's known here in the U.S. That was a big game for me as a child, as well as video games. I'll give a small personal anecdote. So I grew up in the Dominican Republic, which is not, at least when I grew up there, some decades ago. It wasn't the wealthiest country, so we would have constant blackouts. That's actually like a situation. So you can't really play, digital games that often there, especially if you didn't have like an electric generator, which my family didn't. So, playing dominoes, if it's raining outside or whatever, things like that is very common. It's like, okay, you're playing Street Fighter, the lights go off. Okay, now dominoes. So that's never been, making that jump to me isn't something that's like radical or unheard of.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that anecdote there, and yeah, kind of growing up with both of them and being able to write about both of them and having them be ingrained as a part of your life, as well as kind of like your initial thoughts about kind of like now the ease of access and just being able to play a video game and like diving into it like as much as you need to get that critical piece out. So yeah, yeah, thanks for sharing all that. A lot of really interesting thoughts. So I guess kind of the one follow-up question that I have though too is that I do know that you write about other like media as well. So you'll cover music and you'll cover books, I guess, and those kind of similar to video games, you can kind of consume on your own time too. So how do you feel like those overlap with your main focus of video games and just kind of like your work in general?
Yeah, so a lot of my readers, they know that I usually cover, so the way I'm built when it comes to my writing in Pop Matters is I'm the game studies guy. So even a lot of the music or books that I cover, most of them are predominantly linked to games. There's some exceptions, but really it's only really I could think of. I think it's only really one. No, there's two things that I've done that have no relations to games at all when it comes to Pop Matters. Others are maybe there's trying to think. So last year I reviewed Joseph Rolls Thomas's book Sync. It's a great book. It's a fictionalized memoir of sorts, but I actually met Joseph through the it's called it's kind of academic like circle, but it's the Brooklyn Institute of Social Research, and he taught a class on game studies, and so that's like so that gives you like, and he wrote this book, and the book actually talks a lot about his experiences like growing up and playing games on it, and I refer to that in my review. One thing to note when I'm writing as well is like I use whatever it is that I'm writing about to talk about something else, right? I use that as a vehicle, as a portal of sorts to really get into a matter. Yeah, I address what's at hand, what's in front of me, but I use the text when referring to text. It can be video games, it can be books, it can be whatever, music, as essentially as a starting off point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't have any expertise in any of the types of text that you're mentioning. Honestly, at this point, maybe getting to there with board games, but I definitely would have to study them more critically because I listen to so many people talk about them. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm there, but yeah, no, that's a really unique approach, and I like that a lot. Cool. Okay, so we'll just get right into some of our Tetris stuff, and the bulk of the questions, or at least the bulk of my text about questions, is initially about the video game. But I think as we hop into the other categories, the game will naturally pop up, or vice versa. So we'll see. I'm just curious. Sometimes, like when you play games, especially if like your first experience with them was a long time ago, you might have these really profound first memories. Sometimes I have ones that are like, I think I have these memories, but I can't remember them. But there are definitely certain games that I have some really strong first memories of. Do you have any first memories of Tetris that stick out to you?
That's a great question. I don't know. Tetris is one of those games that feels like I've had part of my life forever. Like it's been like something that I can't really tell you what my earliest memory of the game is, but it's something that, I mean, this is gonna be like hyperbolic and but it's like a whim almost. Like it's just like it's always been there, like since I can remember. I have experiences with it. It's like, oh, like I got like you know, when I get like I break my high score or like I've done a feat that I haven't done before. But yeah, it's the earliest childhood memories of it. I just don't. It's such a yeah. I mean I kind of lost of words here for it because it really is something that it just seemed like it always like existed. It's obviously it's a child of like the modern age, right? It's a digital game made like computers, but it feels ancient. It feels like something that we've always done. Like as long as we've been playing games, it seems like we've always been playing Tetris. Obviously, that's not true, but I think that's part of like the beauty of the game.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was thinking about that question too, maybe not as kind of like profoundly linked to me, but I couldn't pick out any particular memory where I'm like, yeah, this is the first time I played it. Honestly, I couldn't say what console. My guess would be a handheld, honestly. I mean, that makes like a ton of sense too, but yeah, probably the Game Boy or Color in some
Yeah, because
iteration.
most people found out about and played Tetris when it was released in the Game Boy in '89. I mean, the game was created in '84, but for at least its first year was only exclusively played in the Soviet Union, passed down through floppy disks and everything. And even that, like the game just like really spread, and then eventually was picked up by several different well, not several, just mainly one distributor who was selling it to other consoles, and eventually it made its way onto the Nintendo handheld. And from there, the rest is history.
Yeah, a lot of a lot of prehistory and a lot of post history too, which will be neat when we talk about like the film and a little bit of the story behind that too. I'm curious to hear your thoughts when we get there. Speaking of some of those first memories though, whereas like Tetris has been kind of like a part of you forever, do you have any like profound memories of being introduced to a game when growing up? Anything that really just sticks out to you? I mean, I guess there's probably more than one, but anything that really comes to your mind?
Yeah, no, yeah, I have quite a few games. The first game I can remember, like talking about, well, video game really, because at that point that was like really shocking seeing like a game like on a screen and like you have like a input device, whatever keyboard or and then like you control what's happening in the screen. That was just broke my mind because it's like, oh well, that's just for like famous people, right? Like television is like, or movies, it's like for grander than, like bigger than life, like personalities. And then you can see that you as like the individual, you can control what happens on the screen. That was like something that was profoundly just altered my conception of just like the world and like reality. The first one was Jordan mentioned Prince of Persia, like the very original Prince of Persia. That's the first game that I remember, like video game that I remember like seeing, and it's like wow, like my uncle who was was a computer tech at the time when that was still like a fairly like new profession, especially in the developing world. It was yeah, I was like wow, this is crazy. This is like incredible. After that, Nintendo Entertainment System, stuff like Super Mario Brothers. And then with the Super Nintendo, you get stuff like Street Fighter 2. That was like I think that was like the first communal video game that I've experienced. Because growing up in a culture that's like very social, we would always play cards, we would play dominoes. I mentioned that from Parcheesi. But that was a game that all the kids would get around. Like if somebody had the Super Nintendo, they had that game. That was the house everybody was going to, and there was like free time. And you're seeing like all the different characters and everything. That was super stereotypical characters, but nonetheless, it's still like the fact that you see like different people from different parts of the world being represented, even if not in the best of light. It's still like wow. You have like Blanca from from Brazil, you have, you have Japan, you have the US, you have Hong Kong, with Chun-Li. It was just really, actually Chun-Li, I think it's just straight China. I'm confused. Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, like how they have like the flags. It's Fei Long is Hong Kong, which is like the Bruce Lee like standing character. So it's super formative game. And the last one I'll give, it's the Final Fantasy series was pretty formative too. Just seeing like a game that's, at least for like the spectator, predominantly story, has like so much story. And I remember times going to, I don't know, I know this might sound odd to you, especially if you're like mainly, US like based, but in a lot of other countries for a long time, the main way that people would be able to play video games, you would have to go to these like video game cafes, which is like somebody would have like this shop and they'll have TVs and they'll have like different consoles, right? And they'll have a power generator. So you would go, and I remember seeing people play stuff like Final Fantasy 7 or 8, which at that point is like cutting edge, like technology. And you're just like stay there like for hours, just like see, you think about it now, it's like, my God, so boring. You're just watching them like, turn-based battles for like how many hours just to get like get a cutscene that you can't even read like this because it's not voice, so you can't even read like because it's all in English because all these are like either counterfeit copies, so whatever. So yeah, that's one of it. Like I said, when it comes to tabletop stuff, analog games, that's also been something that always played. But I don't even think though, like the concept of it being a game wasn't like something like dominoes or parcheesi or specific card games actually became apparent to me till much later in life, because that was just something that you just did. That was just part of like socializing. Like video games were like, that's a game, because especially how solitary most of them were. That's like something you would do by yourself when you had free time, there was nothing to do, etc. Yeah, I mean, I would play dominoes with my grandmother, right? And we would talk. She would tell me about her day. I would tell her about mine. I wouldn't, that's not the case if I was playing like Super Nintendo. I was just focusing on the screen, and obviously sometimes even, upset if somebody like would talk to me because I would like lose concentration and Mega Man would like fall into a pit to his death. And it's like, no, I have to restart this level. So.
That's funny. Like honestly, that last one's kind of funny because when thinking of the question a little bit, there's a handful of things that kind of like swirled in my mind. Nothing like super profound. I think initially like playing some games on a console for the first time, primarily with my dad. Like those were like the memories that stuck out. So when we first got the NES. And like obviously Super Mario, and there was one, oh my gosh, it was just like a little racing game. I probably have it's in a box buried somewhere to the right of me, but I can't think of, it's like a Micro Machines Racer, I think maybe the name of the game. So I have some memories of that too, but I do remember like renting one of the Mega Man and just like binging it like none other. I couldn't tell you which one, but that's funny that you mentioned that game. And definitely not the same situation, but I think growing up like and wanting to play games, like going, that idea of like going somewhere because somebody else is going to have like this console or this game, or even like a really kind of weird thing too is there were, I don't know when like the GameCube came out in the scope of my life, but McDonald's would have GameCubes in like these little rooms sometimes, and you could go and play. I think the two games that I remember most were like Smash and a Sonic game, and you would go in there and you would play, but they would be on some time cycle, 15, 20 minutes where you'd be playing and all of a sudden it'd just start timing out and restarting it. But not the same thing, but you mentioning just kind of
No, but
domain.
I mean, Super Smash Brothers Melee was like that's a formative game as well. I was trying to keep it like closer to like childhood, but
Yeah.
yeah, I remember that game coming out for the GameCube. I saved for over 2 years in anticipation for the GameCube and Melee. I actually bought Melee before I bought the GameCube. I bought it because that's like my commitment. It's like if I get the game and I get a memory card, I have to commit to getting a GameCube. And then sure enough, like I did eventually, my father bought me one. Forget it. It was the same year it came out. It was 2000, but a little later, because I think the GameCube came out in September of 2001 in the United States. But Melee came out in December. So, and then a few weeks later, that's when I got like my GameCube after the release of that game. Yeah, I played that game to like, man, I think I probably had like at least over 500 hours on that game. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I probably didn't have my GameCube until way later. I don't know, again, kind of one of those things. If I had to like pick, well, I don't know. I mostly grew up on PlayStation consoles, and then would try to like supplement with friends, and so obviously a decent amount of Smash, because that's one of those games that always gets played, but not 500 hours.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had a PlayStation 2. I mean, that during the previous console generation, the PlayStation was the console that I had. I thought the 64, I didn't like it. I didn't like how it looked. Like I was mentioning before, before the podcast started, it's like I'm very keen on like aesthetics, but the GameCube just looked weird to me. And it's like weird, not like in a bad way, but it's like so somebody's gonna take time, and this is how like screwed up in my mind I was, even as like as like a teenager. It's like, so somebody's gonna take time to make something to try to sell, and it's gonna look like a cube. It's gonna have a handle, and the colors are like, it's like blindingly bright colors with 4 slots where you put 4 controllers in there. It's like I gotta own that. It's like PlayStation and whatever Xbox. That Xbox looks like one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. But it's the PlayStation's just like, it's like it's sleek, but it's not purple. Prince is purple, so it's like it has to be good. So,
I like the look of the GameCube controllers too. I think the 64 controllers, they look interesting, but they're weird. They're weird in an almost off-putting way.
Yeah, I agree. I think 64 was a low point for the look of the hardware, but I think that's an issue where Nintendo lost a lot of their like one of their key engineers, Gunpei Yokoi, during that period. So like it's also like a weird time for Nintendo too. But I think the GameCube was more leaning into aesthetically, at least some of like the strong suits of the NES and SNES, Super Nintendo being SNES. For those that don't know, and Nintendo Entertainment System being the NES as well. So it's just really neat. I have a lot to say. I'm currently working on a pretty big academic paper on design of like Nintendo products. So we'll see how that turns out.
Nice. So you said that's an academic paper. Where is that going to be like accessible once it's all done?
Yeah, one thing that I try to do when I do anything academic is that it is available, like open access. I know a big issue with academic publications is like just through a paywall. One, it's bad for the one writing it because like 3 people are going to read that. And then also it's, not necessarily what is a political position, but it's also just, I think, just like basic decency, right? If you're going to this process of creating like research and essentially putting knowledge out there. It should be accessible. Like it should be. Like it's just not like, to me, that's, yeah. If I'm gonna like interview folks, if I'm gonna spend countless hours like reading and then like stuff out there, it has to be something that it can be shared to be like made useful. Which just talks about my writing, period. Like even if it's not academic, if it's more, you know, on the quote unquote like approachable, popular like sense, it really becomes something once somebody else reads it. Like if I'm just writing it, it's useful as an exercise, but I don't know if you're gonna bleep this out, but it can be somewhat also like masturbatory, right? Where I'm just like, yeah, I'm really smart. My brain's just like oozing ideas, you know, but then it's like if nobody's like engaging with it, even if it's like one person, that's like fine, you know, but it has to be that engagement is what makes it like worthwhile. I mean, that's why we write, right? That's why we communicate. It's for somebody else to, you know, hear it. Even if it's not necessarily like direct conversation, if nobody verbally tells you, it's like, oh yeah, I read that, or it's just the fact that it's out there and like disseminates, right? I always think one of my biggest influences is jazz composer Wayne Shorter, who passed away last year, and he would always describe how when he would play mainly saxophone, right? You're blowing air into the instrument, and then the air comes out and it rearranges like molecules forever, right? Like that reaction just moves on and just like changes like the world and like how we interact with, even if we can't see it. I mean, I don't know if that's actually like holds up scientifically, but you know, it's a gorgeous, I think it's a beautiful like idea to like consider. And I kind of think of writing the same way as well, or any endeavor that one engages in. It doesn't even have to be quote unquote a creative endeavor. So it can be something else, like a plumber who goes into your house and like fixes, you know, your sink. I mean, it's probably even better because that's actually practical too. Like it's, but then also, you know, all this other stuff. So
Oh, no, I think that message that you outlined is truly beautiful, and you don't have to worry. I won't go back and censor that out. I think it tied to your point extremely well. So no worries there. Oh, awesome. So kind of hopping back to Tetris a little bit. I mentioned the episode where Liz asked you at the end some things that you were playing that you didn't deem a waste of time because, well, that was kind of based on some previous conversation, but some of the things that you talked or said about Tetris is that it is incredible time spent, that it enriched your life, and that in 5 to 15 minutes you can get a full experience. Some of those like direct quotes, some just kind of me adding a couple words, but on the whole, that's what you said. All like, and with all that said too, the game is pretty abstract. So your words about the game still make sense to me, though. So how could you best describe that overall feeling, and what bigger themes come across when playing the game, if any? Is that necessary, and things along that line?
a lot. You gave me a that's like an Otani fireball at me. Yeah, let's see how I can answer this. I mean, no, I think Tetris is one of the true, I mean, you can quote me on this. It's one of the true like masterpieces of when it comes to digital game design. Partly because of its simplicity, but then also because of the way that it enraptures and takes a hold of the player. It's a game that you can, I mean, just in mere seconds, even if you've never played a game before, you understand like what to do. I mean, you have the 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 tetrominos are falling down, right? And even if you don't move, them, you just see boop, and it just stacks and stacks and stacks, and eventually you get a game over if it reaches all the way to the top. So what is the other thing you have to do? Move them. Very simple input, right? And the main way a lot of people first engaged with this was in the Game Boy, which is a it's very rudimentary, very simplistic like design when it comes to input. You have the D-pad, up, down, right, left, and then you have the A and B buttons. I mean, and you have like the start and select button in the middle, but whatever. The only thing that's really important for you as a player is going to be the D-pad and the A and B button for like rotating the piece to try to get a specific fit into it. And like I said before, it just seems like something that like we've always done, which we have as well. I mean, the designer of Tetris, Alexei Pajitnov, he was inspired by puzzle games that he would play in the Soviet Union. Very different in nature, but the inspiration of trying to fit specific pieces into specific spots with their own like limitations, and you have to get specific like wedges or corners just right. Even outside of the game, it's something that we've done. There's always that expression like when somebody knows how to pack or something, they say like which I kind of hate, because they're like, oh, you're playing Tetris. Oh, you're really good at Tetris. I mean, my wife always says that to friends, like when I'm like helping them pack or something, like, oh, he's a great organizer. He's good at Tetris. Yes, I love Tetris and I'm okay at Tetris, but that's not why I'm good at. We've done this before Tetris was invented. But that's what I mean. It's something that just seems like it's always been a part of it, that it just subsumes anything else that's even like just vaguely related to it. It's like, oh, so you're gonna stack books on top of each other. Oh, look, you're playing Tetris. Like, it's just, yeah, it's really like a miraculous like design choice. I'll go into like inside baseball here on it. So I covered an exhibit done by the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, and some of the curators were actually telling me like details of how they got Tetris as part of like the permanent collection of the museum, but they wanted the most quote unquote pure version of Tetris. So what were they able to do is that they got Pajitnov actually redesigned Tetris just as it was created when he first made it in '84, right? When those Soviet computers, back when he was still working, for the Soviet government. And that's a version of Tetris. If you go to MoMA, and periodically when they have it out, that is the version that you would play. It's this essentially one-to-one reconstruction by Pajitnov of the game. And that's the most rudimentary version of Tetris. And it's still fun and it's still great, right? It's one of those things that, so many other games reiterate upon themselves or build on it to the point that the most recent one is the best version, to the point that makes all the other ones obsolete and just flat out unplayable. Yeah, the most recent version of Tetris, at least the most recent great version of Tetris, which is Tetris Effect, is, in my opinion, the best, arguably the greatest game ever made. But I'm biased, right? But if you go back and play the original Tetris, there's still a lot to be had. There's fun to be had. And I mean, what can be said about a game that can be played by everyone and yet be enjoyed, and also have a very scalable gameplay when it comes to like your skill. One thing that's fascinating about Tetris, it starts off as like a simple puzzle game. The better you get at it and the more difficult the game actually becomes, the more lines you clear, it becomes a dexterity game. So it just flips, like completely flips. Like you're not, if you're like on whatever, like 30 minutes into the game and you've cleared God knows how many hundreds of lines, like you're not like focusing on like, oh, no, you're just trying to like clear that. You're trying to like move the pieces to a specific way to like get it in there. It's like it's, it becomes just something just absolutely next level. Just look at how it made the news earlier this year with with somebody actually quote unquote beating Tetris, Willis Gibson, which for the listeners here, my household, we stan Willis Gibson in my household. He's a hero for for the feat. So, but it's at that level, it's not the same game. It's not the game that most of us like play. That's that's
Oh, yeah. So you kind of, some of my thoughts for some later things you're like hitting at too. So I'll try to like expand upon those when we get there. But I mean, I know the way that you captured your thoughts on Tetris and what makes it such a good game are a million times more eloquent than I'll be able to get it out there. But yeah, I think everything you said about the game is on point. And I think, like you mentioned, in that switch, coming from like a little more plotting strategy to that dexterity as well. You get these moments too where you get yourself out of like a bind. You get that one piece into that spot that you didn't think was going to be possible. You kind of pushed away that pressure, that anxiety for like a second, but then it's back, like a split second later. So I don't know, from like a life standpoint, I think maybe that just hits on a lot of the feelings that we have in some of the activities we do too. But
no, yeah, I mean, if we're just gonna talk about life in general, I mean, there's a whole like phenomenon now that's called like the Tetris Effect, like based on actually like research done by I think it's Robert Stickgold and a few other people. They wrote this paper in the year 2000, if I remember correctly. It's called like replaying the game. This is going to be the academic word of the day right here that I'm about to say. It's a hypnagogic images in normals and amnesiacs, right? And that's where the term Tetris effect comes from. It's where people who play something like Tetris, even if it's just for just for like a few minutes, like it captures our cognitive abilities just so well that you would even when you're not playing the game, you're seeing the game, like, and then you start shaping like the way that you do things, like towards it, to the point too that you would even have like dreams. Hence, like the hypnagogic term, because that means like it's applying to like sleep. So it's like, so when you're sleeping, you're like replaying the game, which I've definitely had that. I mean, my very first article I wrote for Pop Matters actually discusses Tetris. I mean, I covered mainly two games. It was the Squaresoft title Chrono Trigger, which might be known to some. It's an RPG game that came out for the Super Nintendo, which had essentially quote unquote dream team of like developers. You got Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, and then also you had the creator of Dragon Quest and Yuji Horii and a few others who worked together to make this like, build this like the end all be all of it. But I also covered Tetris there because I was talking about essentially doing like traumatic experiences, playing games for different purposes. Like, Chrono Trigger is a very different game than Tetris, but what one gets from engaging in these games. And I talked about how I was in a pretty severe car accident in 2017, pretty traumatic. Like I had trouble just like even walking along like the street where there was a car. I couldn't get like in a car because I would just like picture the accident like all the time, especially when it was like in the intersection. Like it got to points where I would even like almost like break down. Like I couldn't drive because if I would drive, like I would see it. I would see the accident as I'm going in, and obviously that's very dangerous when you're driving. But I would play a little bit of Tetris, like 10 minutes a day or something like that. And just because it's so all encompassing, it just got my mind off that. I stopped like reliving the accident just for those 10 minutes. And eventually that helped me dissipate. And there's been studies done to this. I mean, it's the science is still out on that, but for me it's definitely something that helped. And I helped use that, the Tetris effect in that article, just to highlight like the effects, like the importance of, let's call it escapism, right? When it comes to like dealing with traumatic events. So I mean that's a direct correlation to the part of your question regarding like life. Probably more serious and somber than expected, but it's there, right? I mean, we're talking about games here, right? Your podcast is about games like tabletop games and everything, but it's like people should know that there's a reason that we play these things, just besides it being whatever fun, which is really important. I know. So there's this guy Caspian Whistler out in the UK. He actually makes a pretty awesome publication called A Profound Waste of Time, which it's on its third volume now. But just that name, it covers games, but it's like a profound waste of time. I think that pun, just says it beautifully what it is. It's like, yeah, it's like you can argue we're wasting our time. We couldn't be doing something else that's better, but it's still like profound. It's still like important. And we don't want to be dismissive of time, especially if we're socializing, right? I know we're talking about specifically from a very like solitary like sense of playing, like especially like video games tend to be that, but it's like if you're talking about tabletop games, right? You are spending time with other people as you're playing, and that's nothing to to scoff at, especially now when people are more and more like socially isolated than ever. So that's very important. So keep on playing.
Yeah, well, definitely don't have to convince me to keep playing. And you mentioned that your response was probably a little bit more somber or heavy than perhaps I was expecting, but I cannot imagine a more real and or better answer to like what it meant to you and what it can do, what games can do, and how it just like really helped you out. So, well, thank you so much for sharing that, first and foremost. So, well, from something very serious to perhaps a little less serious. I don't want to. Here's my thought. I don't want to try to suck blood out of perhaps bloodless corpse, but I've listened to your words on Vampire Survivors, and I read your review too, and about as much as possible, I agree with your sentiments. I think it's one of the games that I binged. I heard about it. It's like it's. I mean, there are cool things. I won't like say that it's all bad, and I know that you don't say it's all bad either. But so a few bucks as one person made it. There are some neat things about it, but I definitely burned out on it.
My editor gave the game an 8. I don't know if you noticed that, right? Like, yep. You read my review and then it's an 8, and it's like, what? Yeah, I mean, I don't care for ratings and stuff. I mean, I write. I don't like. I'm not a computer, so I'm not like trying to come up with. But when I saw that, I thought that was like perfect, actually, because I mean, it's a great game. But sorry, I'll let you finish. I didn't mean to.
No, I was kind of I was trying to frame that question by starting it off with some of your vampiric writing about it. So, but yeah, so this kind of question is Tetris versus Vampire Survivors, because it's funny. I see some similarities, perhaps earlier in the game, but then I think you get to a point, and you kind of mentioned this already to a degree, but I think Tetris zigs and maybe Vampire Survivor zags, but like all in all, like how would you kind of describe why Tetris is great, and then why maybe Vampire Survivors is okay, and then falls apart or isn't as great?
Well, I would say that, I'll preface this by saying, going back to my point of like the way that I write. So I talk about the thing to talk about something else. So in this case, I talked about Vampire Survivor to talk about essentially the nefarious nature of like gamification, and specifically as seen like with the advent of of smartphones, with a lot of like free to play like clickbait games, essentially, that you're just constantly getting like this like dopamine hit, like constantly, considerably, even though you're doing very little in the sense of it. I mean, Tetris does something. I mean, it's part of the reason why it's the appeal, and it grabs you so much. It's so simplistic, and then you just clear that line. You're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and it can happen, often. It can happen often, and then you get that. So in that sense, they're similar. I guess my issue with Vampire Survivor and games of that ilk is that it's not even that it's a bad game. That's not what I'm saying. Or even, I think it works well for what it does. It's just not the type of stuff that, if I had a choice, as a player, I would want to sink my time in, because it feels almost like manipulative, right? It feels like it's like it knows us as humans, right? It's like creatures of habit, right? Psychologically, it's like, okay, this is what people want, right? It's not even like a conversation. It's not like you and I had a conversation, and and Ryan, you're like, okay, Luis, what type of stuff you want to see like in a game? And I tell you, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna like fine tune a game for you, right? No, it's like somebody in a lab was like, this works, people work this is like and then they release, and it's like, we're done, we're just dead. Like there's nothing we can do. Like we can't. There's very little we can do as like people to actually like not play it, right? It's like, it's like you're lacing drugs on like our food, and then obviously we're like, we can't stop eating it. We just only want that because we're like addicted. So that's really like I mean, I didn't write it that way in my review, but that's really it. That's my issue, and I don't like that. I really don't. I don't. It works very well, but I found myself, like, the game itself, like, it does everything well, but I just couldn't stop like playing it for a while. And I was like, why is that? Like, why is that? Because I'm just actually so engaged with it. Like, it's like something that it does is either like narrative or like gameplay. And it's like, no, it's like, I just want to see these numbers go up. Right. And I want to hear the flashy sound effect. And it does that very well. And stuff like that, I will, I'm always gonna have like my ears go up, and it's like, oh no, what's going on?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, your review said it, and you said it, like just now too. I think it's probably one of those things where maybe even if you're just playing the game early on as like an exploration into it, seeing what it does, seeing some of those combos of the items that you're getting, and the way that they turn into super combos that annihilate everything on the screen, to the point where you said in the review that the game, you can get to a point where the game is playing itself and you don't have to do anything, whereas Tetris, as the game goes on, it's getting harder and harder, which is definitely a big difference in the two. But maybe early on, Vampire Survivors has some of those things that are engaging to you, but then the hooks are sunk in, and then you're done for if you keep going down that path.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Ryan, because I actually I didn't think about this until you made that point, which is like, yeah, the better you do at Tetris, the harder it gets, to the point of like it actually becomes like a cap for certain players, where it's like you just can't, like, this is your limit. Like, the pieces are just falling down way too fast. And, and your reflexes, or your lack of like practice or knowledge of the game, you're just gonna lose, right? If you get whatever, let's say like level 10 with it's actually like a speed in the game, like that might be your cap, and you get there and it's like, oh, that's like done, right? Vampire Survivor, you actually play to make the game easier, and not in the sense of necessarily just even skill level, just like the game actually like gets easier, as you were saying, like it plays itself, which I don't have an issue with that. I'm a big fan of Japanese designed role-playing games, which a lot of people have issues with them because they see them as like, all quote unquote grindy games, or it's like you just like grind to like get over like a difficult like challenge, which is like, I think that's overstated, but I like that when you just play something and it's like you feel like you very few obstacles, right? You just do that. But like I said, Vampire Survivor, it did feel to me like there was just aspects of it, because it's just so ingrained with this like dopamine hits like every millisecond. Like it's just like, I really felt like it's a design based on some really like nefarious, and I'm just gonna, and quite frankly, like sick stuff, like stuff that like I know that's coming under a lot of scrutiny now when it comes to the way that we use like smartphones, right? And and the addiction that can come from these things. And it's in tune to that. It's in tune to that. Now, I'm not going to say that. I mean, and Tetris, I mean, you can argue that maybe it does, but it's not. It doesn't come from that principle philosophy, though. And like I said before, that's a game that I can play 5 minutes, even like once a week, just 5 minutes, and it's like I got what I wanted. Right. I didn't feel that way about Vampire Survivor. I'm certain that there's other people that have, the self-control of, of a 200-year-old yogi who lives up in the Himalayas, and like they're like 5 minutes of Vampire Survivor, and it's like that's all I need. 5 minutes once a year, I'm good. I don't need that anymore. And then they move on. Well, if you exist, if you're listening to this, thank you for your service. To self-discipline. That's not me though.
Yes, and congratulations to those people too. But yeah, I was not one of those people. I was probably more in your situation where, yeah, it was chasing those builds, chasing the destruction of everything. And yeah, it's weird. It gets to a certain point where it is either too easy, or it gets to the point where you've built up your character or your items for the round, and then it just gets to the point where you can't do anything and you lose. So it's like the same difference once it gets to the point. Yeah, whatever. Enough of, like I said, it was already probably bloodless in your eyes when I brought it up anyway. But we can move on to a couple final Tetris game related questions. So I kind of mentioned this to you in some of our initial messaging, but I think something, maybe it's not the best one-to-one, but I mean, I think pinball as a game is cool. Like I like some pinball games for sure, and I think maybe in a similar way that Tetris can be cool too. So I played the game Yoku's Island Express, which took that pinball mechanisms, or just took pinball and then mashed up with a kind of that Metroidvania stuff too, and I thought it was cool. I really liked that game. Big fan of it. Do you feel as if kind of like having this fixed loop type of gameplay, I feel like pinball could be and Tetris could be, do you think that could work for Tetris mechanisms? Because I want that game. I don't know. It's just stuck in my head now.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've been thinking about that when you send me that question, the email. I mean, there's a lot of games that have like a quote unquote fixed loop element, but then as part of like the wider game, like certain aspects of it. I don't know of any that are, well, there's one. There is one, what's actually a series that actually does the Tetris thing on top of other stuff.
Huh.
But it's also called Tetris. It's called Puyo Puyo Tetris, which is like a mix between Tetris and another puzzle game. It's a Japanese puzzle game called Puyo Puyo. And there's a version, there's like a mode of it where it's so dastardly. It's like you have like Tetris and you're playing for like 2 minutes and then it switches to Puyo Puyo. And then it just goes back and forth and you're trying to like do everything. It's pretty neat. It's like, I think it's probably like, I think the closest thing to describe it is like you're in a very rush and important situation and you have to speak 2 languages. Like how you have to like go from speaking to one person to your right in one language and then to your left in another. It's still like the same root language. So it's still like a Romance language, but it's very different in that word. And so that's like the example I can give. There's other games that do different things. I was thinking of something like Square Enix's Dragon Quest XI, which has a mini game within the game where you're essentially forging. You usually have like a forge and you're forging like your items, and it becomes like this, like you're trying to like, it's not really a rhythm game, but you're like pressing stuff to try to like create like this like proper shape, and it has like a great stuff, and it's like, oh, kind of, it looks like Tetris. It doesn't actually, the more I think about it, but I mean, there's probably other stuff there too, but I can't think of anything else from the top of my head. I know board games do, well, because Tetris is real time, but there's a lot of board games that do like a lot of different mechanisms, essentially like different games within like the games. Like a lot of Euro games like have this, right? Where you just have like, you have like a rondel for like action selection or for resource gathering, but then you use that to like, to build, you use that to like gather like specific items to like trade for something else. But then like the track is like some weird track that like goes like 2 ways, like one the other way. And then when both your tracks meet, the game ends or something. And video games don't, at least not, they don't visualize the gameplay the same way too. So sometimes it can be a lot more difficult to like discern that, at least from like first glance, unless like you're really like diving into it.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That game, I think when you mentioned some of the weird kind of initial communication, you threw back some of the kind of like Tetris inspired games you told me about Puyo Puyo, but I didn't. So I looked into some of those games, but I didn't know that there was part where like that one had its own game and then it mixed in Tetris like all at the same time. So
yeah, Puyo Puyo Tetris. There's the original one and there's Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. So there's 2 of them. They're out there. They're out there. They're gonna suck up your time, and no, they're good. It's good stuff. I'm not a huge fan of Puyo Puyo though, so I think Tetris works. I think I like Tetris more.
yeah, and I think probably most people would agree. Maybe more people need to try out Puyo Puyo. Maybe I'll look into it a
No,
little
they
more.
should. They should. It's fantastic. It's great. It's really great. Yeah, it's probably the best puzzle game that Sega has. Yeah, I stand by that. I'm thinking it's better than Columns. It's better.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely poke into that, and maybe in some alternate future where I learn how to design games, I will make my Tetris version of Yoku's Island Express. I'm gonna get right on it.
Oh, there is one like that. I remember now. It's actually an Adult Swim published game.
Oh,
I forget. It's something, I forget the name, but it has something to do with like, I'm blanking out on the name and I don't want to Google it.
yeah.
But it's essentially like a cooking competition. So it goes into like almost like Metrovania gameplay, but you're gathering ingredients, and then you have a cooking portion, and then the cooking portion is you're matching same colored elements to create ingredients. So it goes from this like action adventure way to this just puzzle element to it. So
Okay. Yeah, that's funny. I'll once we're done, I'll definitely Google that one too. But there's something out there that is kind of along those lines, and that has me intrigued for sure. Okay, final specific Tetris video game question, and this is, you mentioned that the Tetris Effect is your favorite version, so you get to create your ideal. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Your perfect scenario to play your favorite version. So, your favorite platform, location. What's your perfect play of Tetris?
yeah, I think if we're gonna get down to like the essence of what the game is, yeah, it would be Tetris Effect Connected, which is like the newest version of that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different types of Tetris. I mean, I bet you a lot of people in the audience haven't heard of Weltris, or have they heard of Hatris or Wordtris? Those are all Tetris games made by Paginov with specific spin-offs. Hatris, it's like this actual hats, and you stack hats on top of each other. And Wordtris is a word game, but with the concept of Tetris. I don't like those. I like the original stuff. So yeah, Tetris Effect is, I think it's probably the greatest thing made for like as a video game. So it's made by Monstars and Resonier, who are two Japanese developers, and it's actually helmed by this designer Tetsuya Mitsuguchi, who actually made Luminous, which is another incredible puzzle game. So Tetris Effect mixes like an audio visual experience with Tetris, which you already would think, right? Because it is already such a trance-like game, but then actually making it an actual trance-like experience, like when you're actually like engaging, right, with the music, with the visuals, it really is. It's phenomenal. And best way to play it is, just typical controls, the way it was. Once the design was perfected, you have like a D-pad and simple like A/B like buttons for being able to spin like your pieces, and and there's some shoulder buttons on the right. So on the Switch is fine, or if you own like a Steam Deck or something like that. I mean, you can play Tetris anywhere. That's the great thing about it, though. You can play it on your, on your browser. You can play it on your smartphone, which you're a heathen if you're playing that with touch screen controls. But I can't. Not everyone can. Not everyone has the luxury. So if that's the only way to experience it, go right ahead.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, once I mean, I've played a good amount of Tetris throughout the course of my life, and it's probably been a little bit of time before I started, thinking about this conversation with you, where I definitely messed around with it on browser a little bit, and then I this week purchased Tetris Effect Connected for Steam, and everything. I don't have enough experience to say like everything that you can say about it, but it's awesome.
Thank you for that. Thank you for, yeah. We have to let them know that that's what we want. So thank you.
Yes, it's so great. I mean, immediately, like you said, the audio element of it, just the first level where you start moving the pieces, and then the audio is changing, and then it evolves as the level does too. It's great. I did something that might be a little blasphemous to you. I went in, and I don't know why, with the rotating A and B, or I don't know what it is on Steam Deck. It's just still A and B to me, just in my brain. That's fine. Where I switched the rotating to the D-pad and had slow drop and fast drop on the buttons.
Oh, that's neat. What is that, like, just how, like, naturally, like, mentally, like, it works for you? Like, it's more natural for you to play that way?
Yeah, I mean, I started off, and that's what I was, like, inclined to do. So I was just dropping the pieces on accident by rotating them with the D-pad.
Okay. Oh yeah, because that's how you do the hard drop. No, it makes sense. And I mean, that's great. I mean, that's, I think, one of the great innovations of, it's old now, but of more like modern, like, games and consoles, is like you can put, like, you decide, like, your input controls now, like how you want to put that, and that's great. It helps if one way is better for you, that's great. And then also, it also speaks just straight up just accessibility. Maybe someone has, you might only have just like one arm to be able to play a game. If that way you can map the controls in one way, that's a great thing to do. So that's great. More power to you.
Yeah, and
well, that's what makes it such a great game, though, right? Because it's like, it's so simple button wise. Like, the mapping, it's, you're not like using like the 7 like shoulder buttons and like the foot paddle, and you have to like hit your light switch every time like something happens, right? It's like, really, you can just play with just like a few buttons.
Yeah, and that's an awesome note too on the accessibility too of the button mapping, and with the game in general, that it has that possibility just to really be on one side, however it is that you need the game to be. I like that. All right, well, we definitely deep dove the game a bit, and now we can kind of get to, and some of these things have been touched on already too, so we can see where we're going with this. But going into the conversation, we had a little bit of homework. You recommended that I check out the video game historian's video on the history of Tetris, and then I recommended you checking out the 2023 film. So for you, coming from like knowing the background of the game, well, probably having studied it a ton, how do you feel as if the movie represented the history?
I mean, it's a Hollywood film, so he's got to go with that. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm not going to get too much into the representation, like how I feel about it. I think its success, it's that it does circle around like something that is like real, like the condition that it was made, that the game was made under, and definitely also just like what made it special. I mean, nobody was, at least as far as we know, nobody was like getting killed for it. You have like KGB like spies, like, and Gorbachev himself. It's like, so that's like, no, that guy was worried about coups and stuff at that point. Like, that was, but yeah, it is true when it comes to aspects of, the socioeconomic structure of the Soviet Union was like deeply changing during the time that the game became, that there was essentially like a bidding war for the game, right? People were scrambling. And then also the fact that the Western and Japanese, game companies and distributors were trying, their perception of, what the Soviets like wanted, because being a quote unquote like communist country, it's like, they don't really care about money. We can just give them, whatever, like they want knowledge or they want like other stuff, that's all they need. It's like no. Even money is not like, even in, this is also too much inside baseball, but like even in like even in theoretical, or even like real like socialist or like communist countries, money's a thing. Like it's a like so it's like nobody's gonna be like, it's like, oh, so I'm gonna give you this like painting. Not that that's what's done in a movie, but it's like, no, I'm gonna exchange this like book. I'm gonna give you these books, or I can give you $1 million. It's like, I'll take the $1 million. We have those books in the library, So, no, it's good. I know there's a few things that I know there's some criticisms of the film regarding the casting of it, specifically like Hank Rogers being played by, I forget the actor's name in the film that plays him.
Taron Egerton.
Yes. I mean, he's like a conventionally like attractive guy. It makes sense why. And there was input by both Hank Rogers, and for people who don't know, Hank Rogers being the person who didn't discover Tetris, but really like brought it to Nintendo, which, I mean, for all intents and purposes, might as well be the person who described well, he actually had it and actually had distributing rights before the Nintendo stuff for specific other consoles, but then eventually got it to Nintendo. And we said before, the rest is history. And but I mean, they were consulted. They didn't seem to have like issues with that, and it makes sense. I mean, it's fine. That didn't bother me too much. It was, I mean, nothing really. The historical representation of it didn't really bother me. It's just more of like considering it on the point of like a story, right? It's like, if you're writing a screenplay and you're writing something, right? If you're quote unquote good at it, you shouldn't have to do all this like sensational stuff, right? It's like KGB spies and all that to make it interesting. I can think of, from my mind, like on paper, sounding fairly like boring films about acquisition or stuff that when it actually is executed, it's like riveting, right? I think a lot of it has to do with audience expectations. So the film is based off, I mean, it's not explicitly stated, but it's based off Dan Ackerman's book, The Tetris Effect, which I have here. And I guess full disclosure for the audience. So Dan Ackerman is so he's actually a member of the New York Video Games Critics Circle with me. So yeah, I know him. And I think the case is still active. He sued Apple and the makers of the film because he says that they essentially plagiarized his work. Like the whole narrative structure of, making like Hank Rogers like the central hero, essentially, and like not necessarily that there's KGB spies, but the whole like intrigue and just like the weird like suppressive like element around like trying to get the rights to the game in Soviet Russia during the time of what would eventually become the illusion of the Soviet Union, right? That's how the book is framed, right? But yeah, I mean that's where I'm gonna leave it when it comes to that too. But it's definitely, I definitely encourage people to read. If you like the film, definitely check out the book. It's really well written. It goes into some aspects of that I found like really interesting that the movie just didn't touch on for whatever reason, either time or it's some really interesting stuff about like the actual like the computer hardware that the Soviets use. I mean, they made that game on like on a your wireless mouse probably has like more power than those computers that were used to make that. So
Oh, yeah, super interesting. I'm definitely really intrigued about that book now, and I'm a slow reader with a big list, but that will get added to it for certain. And yeah, you bring up a lot of interesting points. So obviously our kind of like experiences were flipped. I mean, in my life I've played Tetris, enjoyed playing Tetris, but I had next to no knowledge of the the crazy history behind it. So then I see this movie that does all these different things and definitely, sensationalized some of the ways that these events did happen to make it, more Hollywood. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And then I watched the video that talked about the history, and I feel like just the timeline that was presented in the video was definitely more broad. It presented years before the movie picked up in the first place, and then there were some of those parts that seemed like a little incongruous between the film and then that too. But I guess I feel like it was one of those things, if I had as much knowledge and investment and then probably went to the film, I probably would have been disappointed. But nonetheless, it made me interested in the game more, and now I definitely want to read that book for certain too. So
Well, there's if time is, the book is like 200 pages and it actually reads pretty fast. It actually does read somewhat like a techno spy thriller.
Okay.
In a way. But there's also a graphic novel on Tetris. It's like People Who Make Games Tetris by Box Brown. That's also there. And if there's other stuff. There's the infamous book Game Over, which also has just parts throughout the book about Tetris as well.
Nice. Yeah, cool. Obviously, it's I don't think the history of the game as much of a secret. It's just something that I chalk it up to one of the millions of things that I just didn't know. And
no, it is one of those stories that the more you look into it, the more bonkers it gets. The movie doesn't go into it too much. Actually, it just scrapes it, but just the complexities of the distribution rights of that, it's just like the legal rights version of astrophysics. If you're trying to learn astrophysics, if you're like a 3-year-old. So
yeah, well, yeah, hopefully the film just kind of had an effect of just at least tipping off people to wanting to look into it more, because at the very least that's what it did for me. So okay, we'll hop. So we got kind of a little bit of the film and the story, and now a lot of new resources to look into the story through different lenses in a book and graphic novel, and that's awesome. But you mentioned it earlier that Tetris was inspired by a puzzle game, and then kind of in turn the game has influenced many board games, whether it's through the tetromino pieces or polyomino pieces or any kind of iteration of that puzzle style. So I guess the first question is, do you like and or play any of these games?
Meaning when it comes to tabletop games, right?
Yeah,
that are
sorry.
influenced by it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I play a lot of board games. I have a lot in my house, and I guess for people that don't know, so I also do work and contribute to a YouTube channel that does board game coverage, historical games, but it's Fred Serval's Homo Ludens, which you should definitely check out. And I've been in several podcasts that we've talk about specific games there, and I've done videos on the channel. We have one coming out actually. We're recording it in about a week and a half. When it comes out, it might be a live recording, so I don't even remember. Yes, but it'll be good. No, there's definitely a lot of cool stuff there. Those puzzle games, I've never played that game that Pajanov was. I forget the name of it. I think it's Tetromino, something like that.
Yeah, I think
Which you're just getting shapes, like wooden shapes, polynomials, and you get this board and you're supposed to like put them together. And actually, Hajanov actually designed a board game very recently that actually takes that, but it's like a dual version of that. And it's called Tetris, I think it's called Tetris Dual. If I'm not, or no, it's called Table Tetris. Called Table Tetris. That's what it's called. You can find it on BGG, and it's essentially you just have like two different. You essentially everybody you have one board, and everybody takes turn, and you put like one tetromino on there, and you're essentially trying to like block you're essentially trying to be the last person that puts in the tetromino, right? Because you have a set number of pieces, and they're distributed amongst each other. So there's certain times that you're going to have a piece that just isn't going to fit anywhere. So you're trying to like play the game similar to like dominoes, right? How you're trying to block people through like reading like what numbers they have. I haven't played the game. I just found it as an interesting tidbit because Ajanov designed it and it has like the Tetris license to it. A lot of games that are very much like Tetris or directly licensed by Tetris, I've never played. That's one of them. I haven't played the Tetris game by Philip Walker Harding, who sure you are aware, and then some of your listeners, like renowned board game designer. I have played his Silver and Gold, which is his roll and write that you essentially get specific. You get to color in specific grid shapes that are polynomials and everything like that. So that's a game that I really do enjoy. There's Bricks as well by Wolfgang Warsch, which is another roll and write, which that one's a real-time roll and write, which is supposed to simulate Tetris. That I haven't played. That looks awesome though. And what am I? That's really, I mean, I can think of, there's other games that do certain similar stuff, right? As we were talking about the game, right? It starts off as like a puzzle game, right? You're trying to put pieces in specific orders, but it becomes a dexterity game. So if you want to just get the sense of it, there's so many games that have that experience, right? Especially like in tabletop format. There's so many like build a tower type of games now. Jenga. I think there's a Jenga version of Tetris as well, which I haven't played, which sounds like horrible. Like when it's like you can't see, like you're just trying to put a piece, you can't see like how the piece. I guess you have to memorize like the shape of each colored piece, but it's that's one thing that's out there. I'm trying to think. That's really, I can't really think of much, really. It's a Tetris-like. Not really, but it is one where you are collecting pieces that are dropping, right? Per the rule book itself, it's like if anything that you don't pick up gets dropped to the floor, right? And so, and you are creating, specific. It's just lines, but it fits into like your board a specific way. So.
Oh, yeah, as well as an interesting one. Because like you said, obviously it's just lines and connecting the pieces, but you definitely are incentivized to think about the combos that you can build with the pieces. That's what's going to score you like a grand majority of your points throughout the course of the game. So interesting. I think I asked this question. You mentioned earlier, you talked a little bit about the differences between tabletop games and Tetris and specifically the real time. So I think like being able to capture that you would have to have some type of like real time element, unless you're really just going for the puzzly kind of like strategy side of it. So some of the games that I put were Project L, and that one has like a pretty cool tactile feel to it as well. And I mean, there's really no time pressure, but I think with the engine building in it, you can kind of enter that like flowish feel a bit. And then Cartographers is another roll and write example. And that one I just like because I think the pressure comes at you at the end when you really are starting to get filled up and you have to consider the scoring conditions. And then technically not time, not real time, but written into the rules in My City is once you draw the card, you are supposed to place your piece like immediately. You're not really supposed to think about it. So I don't know how much you can enforce that rule necessarily, but I think it's trying to hit at that feel too.
Yeah, no, Dr. Knizia, who's the designer of My City, he definitely has a lot of games that you can argue like fit within that realm. I mean, funny enough, me and Fred, we interviewed Knizia. That's up on his channel. If people want to see that. He dropped some news about a game that's going to be released. It's the only place that's been covered, so you have to listen to the interview to like find out. But yeah, that's a fantastic designer. Another game, since you brought Cartographers, another game that comes to mind is I think it's Let's Make a Bus Route, the dice game by Sashi and Sashi, which is a dice version of Let's Make a Bus Route, which both are well, one's a flip and right, and then Let's Make a Bus Route becomes a roll and right. And that's one where you're rolling and you get to assign a specific, it's not a shape, it's more like a route, but the way it fits within the board is essentially a shape. And you have to essentially fit that into your route, and you can never cross. Like you can never actually like return to a point that you've done before. So that's what, there's a lot of stuff, and tabletop games are, and there's so many that just do different stuff. There's the new game, Fit to Print, which has a real-time element, which you're also laying down. So like new stories, right? But the way that they're laid out, it's like in this like grid system board, and you're trying to like make them fit. And that has an element that you can play that solo, you can play that with several people. I've talked to a lot of people that said that that's like a fantastic game. I haven't played it yet. I know the game designer and also podcaster Dan Bullock, who designed stuff, obscure games, but he's done stuff like No Motherland Without, and Iran 1979, I think is the other one. He loves that game. Like he thinks it's a fantastic game.
Awesome. Yeah, you said that one. That sounds like an awesome example. And yeah, from kind of that design group, I've played a bunch of their other ones, but that is one that I haven't played. But yeah, really interesting note too. At the top, I didn't mention specifically, obviously, your work with Fred and Homo Ludens, but I will definitely link. I'll link, that channel. I'll link, your work on Pop Matters and then your website as well too. But I started working through some of like your videos on Homo Ludens, and I'm excited to finish those up too, because a lot of good conversations with a lot of people. And I had the Knizia one up. I had that one clicked up, but I was still listening to the board games and colonialism panel. So I figure I finish one before I get to the next, obviously. But
yeah, I mean, you definitely watch definitely the most like influential one that we've done. Definitely got a lot of people contacting us, and it's a pretty good panel too. I mean, we got Cole Worley there, Dr. Mary Flanagan, who's runs Resonant, but then also has talk about how influential like academic when it comes to like game studies. Who else is there? Jason Perez is there as well, and I might be forgetting the other person, which I definitely am.
Brian Train.
Brian Train, how can I forget the best? Yeah, Brian Train. He's also a game designer, specifically focusing on like conflict simulations. Yeah, we'll be doing another panel similar to that later in the year. Try to have Cole back and a few other like Dan Thoreau and other folks. So talk about some some topics. They're similar to that, but different flavor.
Yeah, some awesome stuff. I really like that channel, the work that you're doing there, and just being able to like have all these different outlets. I think it kind of goes to the point that you like talked about with your idea of like these scholarly pursuits and like being able to share them with people and have them think about them too, and hopefully think about them critically in a way that they perhaps hadn't, or just adding different ideas to the conversations that they were either having with other people or in their heads then too. Good stuff. Okay, so you shared like some really good thoughts for kind of my nebulous catch-all Tetris in real life category. And honestly, the story that you shared early on is probably the best answer for anything that I could even question here. And I don't even think that I really did. Well, actually, no. But nonetheless, I guess my one or two questions in this category, because I've been taking up a lot of your time here. I just kind of looked. I'm like, oh my, we are getting after it with this talk. But so you mentioned the Tetris effect early, and that idea of like seeing the game and like the puzzle pieces like after you close your eyes in your sleep, trying to still figure out that puzzle. Have you had other, or are there any kind of other notable games, movies, or images that give you or have given you the Tetris effect that aren't merely Tetris?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say I'll start off with saying that there's no game like Tetris in that regard, meaning that you can just play it for a little bit and be engaged just so deeply for a little. I mean, there's definitely, but that being said, yeah, you can have, I mean, going back to that article, it's not just like the original article that coins the phrase, like the Robert Stick quotes, replaying the game. It's not, they just use Tetris as the example, right? And it's a perfect example for what they're trying to state there. But there's other stuff too. I mean, anything that you just like do a lot. I mean, it can be a real life stuff. I mean, I don't personally garden, but gardening is something. Or even, well, a humorous example is if you have, or any of the listeners have watched Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times, there's a famous scene where he's like working the assembly line, and the task is just so repetitive. He's just like screwing bolts together, and the task is just so repetitive, but he's doing it so much that he essentially, like, that's the only thing he could do. So, he's like outside of work, he's like, moving his hands like he's doing, so if one has specific jobs like that, these are things that also you think about it. I remember when I was in high school, I was in a technical like high school. So you're getting your high school diploma plus you're getting like a tech degree. And my tech degree was in culinary arts. And we had times that we would like make sandwiches. We'll run like a kitchen. And one of my main tasks was like I was like the sandwich guy. And I remember I would make, it's like a week that I made so many sandwiches that like I went home one night and I had a dream that I was making sandwiches. And then it's like, no, I'm not doing this ever again. Like that. So that type of situation, any task that really engages you to a point where not only gets your full attention, but then also you, after a while, you're able to perform it essentially subconsciously. Like you don't have to engage your conscious to do it, is something that this is just going by the by the article, you would get that effect eventually. You would get that effect at one point. Yeah, but if if you play a game for like a long time, or you do something for a very long time, you're most likely going to dream about it, right? Like I'm trying to think of an example of something recently. I mean, I'm fairly busy, so like I'm never engaging with something to a point, because I have to like split like my tasks and everything. If I play a game, I'm not playing a game for more than like an hour or something, because I have to do something else. I have to like read, or I have to like do other stuff. So it never becomes, well, actually conversations or something. That's probably more neurotic, but right, like you're having a conversation and like you don't think the conversation went well or something, then like in your sleep, you're just like, oh, like I should have said this differently, or I should have like handled that differently. That might not necessarily be the same thing, but it's definitely something that like gets you that way.
Yeah, that's a interesting note. I think the one that kind of like hit me that I didn't really think about was kind of like the real life tasks and like the sandwiches for you, just kind of like that. It is patterns, it's things that are kind of like, falling into patterns, doing it, and just having it continue on in your brain, even when you want it to be done, potentially. Okay. Okay. One more kind of question. So you talked about, and I didn't actually write his name, but you mentioned about pretty recently how there was the boy who, quote unquote, beat Tetris. I haven't looked into it a ton. I think, the headlines that I saw mentioned how, I mean, he'd been a really good Tetris player for a long time, but then that his father had recently passed as well, like right before he beat it too. But so that's just like kind of really crazy timing that is something that just happened. But you commented on your conversation with Liz that you're not much of a fan of like speed runs. And first off, I didn't really know much about speed running until, I mean, I knew it was a thing, you see like videos or whatever, but then I watched, I think, a single video on some of the Mario, like, like original Mario speedrunning stuff. And I was like, wait, this is just so bizarre. It's crazy, like the things that people are doing to like try to save frames in order to beat a level as quick as they can. So I guess, would you constitute beating Tetris as the same as like speed running, or do you have like a differentiation between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's different because so Willis Gibson, who was the first person known to quote unquote beat Tetris, they played the game. They just played it until essentially the game crashed. So that's how it, I guess it's now defined, that you beat Tetris. Yeah, so that's different in the sense of like you're not actively like, I mean, that's a good question, because you are active. Well, you're playing it to break the game, but I think what makes speedruns, yeah, you know what? Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, would be classified as a speed run. And I think now in the future, people would try to do games done quick, which is like the big like event that happens once a year where, people speed run games for charity, etc. And I think that's something that we would probably see now. I think what makes that different is that people didn't know you can do it until this year. Like it was always like theorized. People were like, oh, like eventually if you just keep playing, the game's just gonna crash. This was the first time that at least we know, like there's been documented that there's people that have run like the code of it and like, and seen go into the game, which is a part of speed running. I mean, one of the interesting things about speed running, I'll share this between you like in the chat later, but there's like a really funny like YouTube clip for this channel. I forget the channel's name, and it's like this discussion, and it's like somebody like saying that like speedrunners are they're like woke or like lazy because they're like trying to like like be like they're all like left. It's like it's really dumb. It's like a comedy skit, but it's like they're all like trying to like they don't want to work hard. That's why they want to just like fast speed through like the game. And then you're just like, if you actually know like what it takes to speed run the game, it's like it couldn't be further from the truth. Like some speedrunners like know the game better than like the creators. Like they know because you have to know the code, so you have to like know like where can you glitch it to a specific way that you can like essentially just cut off just like sometimes hours of a game. So you can like essentially similar. It's like the Mario like warp like tunnels, right? It's like you find the hidden tunnel and then like you go up like 3 levels. Instead, like this is actually like you're actually playing like with the actual like with the source code of the game to do that. It's so you have to find that out. You have to like essentially perfect the play of the game itself, like timing, like how to do like moves. Like it takes, I mean, it takes hundreds of hours. Like even for like a short game, even a game that would typically take somebody maybe like just like an hour to beat just on a regular like situations, speedrunner can spend hundreds of hours on that game just so they can know every nook and cranny, just to shave off like half a second of like their time. So it's I mean it's definitely like a skill, and it's a really fascinating like aspect of video game culture. I don't know, there's really no analog to that when it comes to board games, really. I mean, when you're play testing a game, you're trying to break it to see like if it can hold up, right? Like if maybe there's issues with the math or like issues like the system, but you can't like what are you gonna you're gonna like I'm gonna bend the card. I'm gonna bend like the card to like I don't know, and I'm gonna get like a benefit from that. I mean, so that's actually like that's an interesting thought to have. I don't know, maybe in some of these quote unquote legacy games, right? Maybe there is maybe I mean, can you just cheat? I mean, I guess that would be cheat, but you just like open the legacy game and just open all the boxes. And it's like I speed run the whole thing, right? Yeah.
Maybe, maybe
I,
like,
yeah.
sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I hope that I wasn't the first person to ever like say that. That's like the way you speed run a board game. You just open up all the.
Maybe now people are going to learn how to beat those legacy games super fast, but
don't come on. Like you're gonna spend those games most of them are pretty expensive, especially like the new ones. Like the new like Ticket to Ride one, that's like $100 game or something. You're gonna spend $100 just to open all the boxes, and then it's like it's over. I don't need to play this ever again.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting question. I don't know if you can really get any sort of analog comparison. The idea of playtesting a game and making sure that there aren't things that can be broken is a really good probably not one, but like a really good example of thinking about it. But perhaps like dexterity games, maybe like dexterity stacking games, to see if you can make it like very simple example, like your biggest Jenga, or the biggest Jenga the fastest, or something like that. But it's not going to be the same as finding every missing frame or thing that you can do to break a level of like Mario or something.
Well, that's kind of similar in a way, because there's different quote unquote genres of speed runs. There's tool assisted, which you use like you use software or something to find, to like help you find, specific like glitches or etc., or change like aspects of the games that are like innate within like the general like gameplay. That's a and then there's just ones that don't use it at all, and those are the ones that are like next level, right? Like you're just, yeah, you know that game, like you read that game, like like a monk in monastery studies the Bible, like you just know it, you just know every nook and cranny of it. I'm trying to think of when it comes now. When you mentioned like analog games, something that comes to mind. Well, I don't know. Well, just use this example of a jigsaw puzzle. I know it's not a perfect example, but there's certain people that there's a way that you can, play it, fix it to a point that you can get really good at it and fix it really fast. But there's like ludicrous examples of people like taking like the stickers off and like putting like the other stickers to all match. I mean, isn't that essentially a form of speed running? We're getting into like weeds, like deep stuff. Then we're gonna have to start talking about like magic circle stuff, like Posinga, and it's like cheating, this stuff, right? And but it does raise like I think one of the things that it still has to be like a skill. It still has to be like you need to know. You still need to play the game, and there's still like a skill based element. It's just that you quote unquote unlock the different dimensions, so to speak, of it, right? Like you're playing it in a different like plane than you would otherwise. And there's a lot of difficulties to be able to do that within the analog sense, right? In tabletop games where you don't break that magic circle, where it just actually just becomes just straight up cheating, or other things that might, for a lot of people, might just break the immersion and just like ruin the quote unquote fun, right, of it. Because a speed run can be fun. If anything, it's like a new way of playing like a game, right? Like, okay, you beat Super Mario Brothers 3 like 100 times. So what can you do to spice it up? It's like, well, now I'm just gonna like see if I can just go as fast, just find all these places and just, okay, I beat the game in 2 hours. Now I'm going to try to beat the game in an hour, in 30 minutes, right? Like all these other things. Can you do that? Can you do that with like Twilight Imperium? Am I going to like, okay, it took us 16 hours. So now we're going to try to like, we're just going to be on it and we're just going to try to beat it and like, well, finish the game, right? We're going to finish because only one person's going to win. So it's like, we're just going to finish it in like 10 hours. I mean, that's a interesting, design challenge and like just thought experiment for like designers and players to consider when they play. It might ruin your game though, but that's that's for the brave.
Well, you mentioned legacy games, so maybe people can think of how they can beat Gloomhaven as fast as possible. They'll play Gloomhaven like 10 times. Now they know what every like level is. They know the fastest route to get to the end game, and then they actually have to
buy the updated book format, not the tiles to set up. That would automatically, you'll save so much time.
You're just like, all of a sudden you lose a tile piece and your speed runs over. You're like, oh, where did it go? Where is A8? Who took it?
It's in the dog's mouth. The dog is like, it eats it. It's like, oh no.
Oh goodness. Well, that's funny. No, there are definitely some things to consider. You said we got in the weeds, but I like some of the things that we found there.
Hey, that's where you catch Pokemon, right? So it's good. You got to go into the grass.
It's like a very wise lesson to take away from this.
I mean, sometimes you get a Caterpie, other times you get, you can get a Pidgey or whatever it is that you like. I don't know.
Well, we got like a relatively high level Pidgey for where we're at in the game right now. So
a shiny Pidgey.
Awesome. So, well, we'll move to the wrap up thoughts and the penultimate question that I have is always the text question. So I mean, we've been talking about Tetris a lot, so maybe that is still the text that has been stuck on your mind lately, but is there anything of note that you've been thinking about a lot?
I've been thinking about, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of stuff because I'm writing a lot of stuff, you know. I have been working on a article about Tetris for the past year, on and off. It's not like I've been actively working for a year, because then at that point it'll be like a book or a monograph, but I have been thinking about it for a bit. So it was great when you messaged me. It's like, oh yeah, man, I've been, so you know, even this conversation, I'm using it for part of like what I'm gonna potentially talk about. Maybe I'll give you like a shout out to on it for helping me out. So it's what else? I've been reading Hayao Miyazaki's the animator, the Studio Ghibli animators book, Starting Point, which covers his career from 1979 to 1996. The most pessimistic human being on the face. It's just fascinating, just like the stuff that he like says on there. And I recently wrote an article about the game Kingdom Hearts 2, which is going to be coming out in March, with with an internet magazine called Unwinnable, which has some great writing on there. So I've been thinking about that a lot. So that's a game that I hate. So yeah, if you're the listeners get to read that, I hope that it comes across how I feel about it. I mean, yeah, what I have been playing for fun. Well, I've been thinking about ARCs a lot, the leader games, early stuff. So I played that well, Cole taught me the game at PAX Unplugged, and I've been thinking about that game a lot. So I'm excited when that comes out this year, and any other tabletop stuff. Been playing a lot of Oink games, which are just good. Tiger and Dragon, which that came out recently, which is a hybrid on a battle game, a traditional battle game. It's really good. Like it's really good improvement, and doesn't come in a small box like the typical Oink stuff. And trying to think, and that I've been thinking about games wise. That's it. I mean, I've mainly been doing more reading than playing, just because I do that. That's how I usually work in the beginning of the year. I usually try to like get my knowledge base up or like refresh on things, so then I can actually, you know, I can talk about other stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of text to think about. That the book that you mentioned, that sounds fascinating. I'm skipping ahead because you just mentioned it, but you mentioned the Oink games because you showed me a little bit of Hey Yo before we started up chatting, and I'd heard of the Tiger and Dragon game, because that's a super new one, and like you mentioned, a little bit of change in form for the size of the box. So very neat. Okay, so the final question is, oh, pardon me. All right, all my talking caught up to me, I guess. But you mentioned, the scholarly like journal that you're working on, some of the articles that are going to be coming out, for Pop Matters and other sites, the couple of the videos that will be coming out with Homo Ludens as well. Anything else to have the listeners look into from you that you've been working on that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I guess this is always an issue when people ask me this, because I have to start like narrowing down. Yeah, so I'll have a live stream with Fred Serval on next Sunday. on the Homo Ludens YouTube channel, also on Twitch as well. We're going to be interviewing a few game designers who have unionized. So we're going to cover the topic of unionization within the creative space in the tabletop industry. Jeff Engelstein, who's like a famous designer, he'll be one of the panelists for that. In regards to things, yeah, I mean, I should have. I just released an article. I think it was last. It's actually a Monday. On Monday with Pop Matters, it's a review of a book called "It's Not All Fun and Games," which is a book about video game and toy production by Mark Fleetman, who's it's like a renowned figure. He actually had a New Yorker article on him about 2 years ago because he had like this like collection of all these like games, just like massive memorabilia trove, and like his daughter was trying to ask like, you know, if this stuff is worth anything, and it led to the Video Game History Foundation going in and like evaluating his stuff. So he released a book with Press Run, which is like the book publishing wing of Limited Run Games, which does, you know, like limited like reissues of video games. So that's a pretty neat book. If anybody's interested on that side, a lot of like really good pictures. Fairly affordable too. It's like $20, $25. Highly recommended. Anything else? Yeah, I have like I said, I have an article coming out with Unwinnable on Kingdom Hearts 2. Hate that game. So yeah, I have other stuff. I just can't. I have a lot of stuff coming out on my website soon. I have that article on Tetris is going to come out there. I also have a review of, well, a review. It's actually it's a weird thing. I'm going to talk about there's a video game series called Frog Detective, which is an adventure game series. And I'm going to use that to talk about what makes a criminal, like in real life, like how we identify, because the game's about detectives. So and that's about it.
Yeah, that's about it. Like, 20 different articles, a bunch of panels. That's it.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff. I just can't, like, yeah. Sometimes it's even good to say that out loud because it's like, what the hell else? Like, yeah, sometimes it can be like a lot. But I'm narrowing down. I have so much stuff. I mean, PAX East is coming up, which I'll be there in about a month. So if anybody's gonna be there, I don't know if you know what I look like, but I'll have my press badge and probably my name. So if you recognize me, say hi. I'm also going to be in Circle DC, which is a tabletop convention in DC, run by Fort Circle Games, which, if you know, they release Votes for Women. They have their new game coming out, which is the Halls of Montezuma, which looks awesome. So that's the only conventions I'll be on this time of the year. So this part of the year.
Yeah, the Circle DC was just brought to my attention, and this spring I'll be coaching track, so hard for me to get out. But I was kind of bummed when I heard about that, and I looked into it. I was like, oh, that seems like it'll be a good one.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, I highly recommend if any of the listeners are interested. I mean, it's in DC, it's in the DC area. So, but it's a great fun. It's actually fairly intimate. I think the ratio between like game designers and players, it's like 2-to-1. I think mostly everybody who goes there is like a designer. So it's really neat. But you have like a lot of great people. So if you want to like play games with people like Liz Davidson, myself, David Thompson, I don't know if he's going to be here this year, but he was there last year. So, a lot of great names there. So
that's fantastic. So yeah, anybody here winds up going there, definitely look out for Luis and all the other people he mentioned, and with like such a great ratio of designers to non-designers, it's like the teacher to pupil ratio. If you're a non-designer, you'll be in good hands with a bunch of nice people to help you out. But yeah, with all those things you're working on, all those things that you're doing, and I really, really appreciate you taking your time to spend it with me and have this conversation. Like I said, there was just kind of like that feeling. Well, everything that you said in the episode that I talked about with Liz, I enjoyed. I re-listened to it. I usually don't wind up like re-listening to too many like episodes. I mean, here and there, but that was one that just really struck a lot of chords with me. So I was really happy when you're like, "Yep, I'll talk about Tetris anytime." was your response? So I'm like I said, beyond appreciative that you took all of that time to talk about Tetris and a whole bunch of other things with me tonight.
No, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Intertextual Cardboard Experience, the most Tetris podcast about board games and any other text that they connect to. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time here. Any further support, such as sharing the show with friends, following the page's socials in the episode description, writing a review, filling out the feedback form, or doing anything else you can think of is greatly appreciated. Keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing.